Welcome to POTUS 2016, where we call the presidential horse race and pour cold hard facts on the overheated campaign rhetoric. I'm Marty Goldenson, in for Brian Lehrer. So, against all odds, defying the GOP establishment and the pollsters, the outsider who promises to make America great again, to create millions of jobs, to keep dangerous Muslims from our shores, and to build a wall on our southern border, he has finally and officially won the Republican nomination for President of the United States. Here's the moment.
I have the incredible honor of not only being a part of the ride that's been this election process, and to watch as a small fly on the wall what my father has done in creating this movement, because it's not a campaign anymore, it's a movement. Speaking to real Americans, giving them a voice again. And it is my honor to be able to throw Donald Trump over the top in the delegate count tonight with 89 delegates and another 6 for John Kasich. Congratulations, Dad, we love you!
Of course, no one loves Donald J. Trump like Don Jr. and the Trump clan, but the politicians and the others chosen to stand before the podium this week have been enthusiastic. This includes the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, who, in the past, accused Trump of textbook racism, Chris Christie, who said we don't need an entertainer-in-chief, also on the roster for the rostrum, Senator Ted Cruz, who has called Trump a pathological liar, and Trump's own running mate, who said of Donald's Muslim ban, offensive and unconstitutional. So, today we deconstruct the political adaptations and the new rhetoric from the stage. The words preview 17 more weeks of campaigning that we're about to endure. They also raise the question, are we hearing the words that will help Trump win the White House? We'll get to all that in a moment, but first, some perspective about the historical moment we find ourselves in, including the racial divide and the pessimism of the electorate. Yeah, time for the horse race. One key to the Clinton versus Trump campaign is the racial divide. It's become wider after the cascade of terrible events involving blacks and the police. According to recent Pew polling, blacks and whites are worlds apart on their perceptions of racial equality in this country. Pew found that about 2/3 of blacks said it's a lot more difficult to be black in this country than to be white, while just over a quarter of whites and 37% of Hispanics agreed with that statement. 84% of blacks also said that blacks were treated less fairly by the police. Only half of whites agreed. The gap in perception was also evident among each candidate's supporters, as a majority, 57% of Clinton backers, said that it's a lot more difficult to be black than white in America, but just 11% of Trump supporters agreed. And has electing a black president helped racial relations? According to a Pew poll released earlier this year, about half of black respondents said President Obama has made progress on the issue, while only about a quarter of whites agreed. Conversely, almost a third of whites believe that President Obama has made things worse. Just 5% of blacks thought so. So, who might benefit politically overall from this racial divide and the general sense of unease in the land? Election prognosticator Nate Silver averaged the most recent results from various polling groups, and he found that Hillary Clinton showed a significant edge over Trump on several top issues, including race relations, foreign policy, international crises, and immigration. And here's some more data, this relevant to the desire of voters to get America back on track. Turns out that America's frustration with the direction of the country is nothing new. It has long been a mainstay of public opinion. According to ongoing Gallup polling, in just 8 of the past 36 years were Americans more satisfied than dissatisfied with the direction of the country. Predictably, the economy played a significant role, as dissatisfaction has always been highest during recessions. But 6 years after the Great Recession ended, faith in the direction of our country still languishes. How come? There's a second likely suspect. According to the poll crunchers over at Huffington Post, 15 years of waging a global fight against radical Islamic terror after 9/11 is depressing us all long term. And it's worth noting that polling suggests that Donald Trump may hold a slight edge over Clinton on both the economy and terrorism. However, the GOP will have to build bridges within their own ranks on trade and immigration and other issues. Hillary is uniting them, especially white men. A June ABC News Washington Post poll found that 75% of white men had a negative view of Clinton. To offset that deficit, Clinton will be counting on women with whom she is far more popular, and women do represent a majority of the electorate. All right, joining us to reflect on all this, Ian Tuttle, National Review Institute Buckley Fellow in Political Journalism, and Ryan Girdusky of the website Red Alert Politics. Welcome, both of you.
Thanks for having me.
Great. Let me start with you. What do you think the purpose of this ongoing convention is, and has it met that purpose? Because most people say, oh, this is about getting to know Trump, or this is about party unity. Do you agree with those?
Well, I would say most years it's a celebration of the establishment in nominating one of their own for the presidency. It has been for decades. I think that this time there's two separate things going on. Trump's team is trying to reintroduce Trump to the American people who they've known him for over 35 years. The Republican Party is trying to both rebrand themselves and say, and you can notice in a lot of the establishment speeches that they're not mentioning Trump that much, both reestablishing themselves so that maybe they don't lose down ballot races in case he loses, and they are trying to show some face of party unity.
Ian, how are they doing?
Well, it's been entertaining. That's for certain. I think if you're in a position like Paul Ryan, let's take his recent speech. What you saw is sort of, I think, indicative of where party leadership is. They're trying to create sort of an image of a party that is roughly coalesced around this guy who they're willing to sort of back this play, and they're, as Ryan noted, prosecuting Hillary Clinton intensely during this convention.
Yeah, and it's interesting. If you listen to Paul Ryan's speech, which I guess we all did on Tuesday, he turned that Trump rebellion into something good for the party, like it was going to refresh the party. I think we have a minute of that that we can play.
Democracy is a series of choices. We Republicans have made our choice. Have we had our arguments this year? Sure we have. You know what I call those? Signs of life. Signs of a party that's not just going through the motions, not just mouthing new words for the same old stuff. Meanwhile, what choice has the other party made in this incredible year filled with so many surprises? Here we are, at a time when men and women in both parties so clearly, so undeniably want a big change in direction for America, a clean break from a failed system. And what does the Democratic Party establishment offer? What is their idea of a clean break? They are offering a third Obama term brought to you by another Clinton.
A clean break from a failed system, as if that was what the Republicans were going for all along. I think they were shocked that they got that, right? That's not what they were heading for.
Well, maybe the people in that room were shocked, but the voters weren't shocked. I mean,
Right.
It wasn't even close, and you had every single brilliant pundit who spoke for the people sit there and say, oh, this man doesn't have a shot in hell. He won't even come within steps of the nomination. They were all wrong. Most of the people in that room still can't get over it, and my guess is most of them are wrong too. You know, they're mourning the death of their political relevancy. That's what's going on in a lot of these people's minds.
I think what's particularly interesting about Ryan, and you saw it in that speech, not necessarily that clip as clearly, but he says at one point, Donald Trump and Mike Pence offer us the best chance at a better way. Now, this is a kind of clever thing because Paul Ryan, over the past several months, has been releasing a series of policy documents that sort of outline a broadly conservative vision on domestic policy with some foreign policy called A Better Way.
Better Way. And we've covered a number of those over
Right.
the Obama and the...
So essentially what Paul Ryan is saying is we can use Donald Trump where we can't use Hillary Clinton, where she doesn't offer us a chance to push through our agenda. So the way that he's framed this is in some sense, he's allowed that he and the rest of the conservative leadership in the Republican Party are going to be in some sense in an adversarial relationship with their own nominee and their own president were he to be elected. That seems to me a striking concession, and it undercuts the idea of unity because it's not clear whose unity we're talking about. Paul Ryan's? Is it Paul Ryan's party? Is it Donald Trump's party? Is it, a traditional conservatism or sort of a nationalist populism?
Ryan, do you buy this
I
argument?
agree. I completely agree because Mitch McConnell had the same thing. Mitch McConnell is something very, very smart. And he sat there and started noting the accomplishments of the Republican-controlled Senate because they're often labeled the do-nothing Senate. He said, we passed this, we passed this, we passed, but Obama vetoed all these things. Give us Trump, and you'll get what we promised you. In the sense is Trump is just a figurehead. He'll be a rubber stamp for us. Do I believe that that's going to happen? No. But that's what they're selling right now, both as a ticket of party unity and to show how relevant they really are, because Republicans are really furious at the party because they believe that they haven't done anything for them.
Sure. I mean, that's part of the reason there is a Trump, because many people feel that neither the Republicans nor the Democrats have done anything.
True.
All right. So, but part of the job, however, it seems to me, of this convention is to draw in more people. Trump is, at best, even in the polls, and certainly not in the Electoral College. And he's got to draw in more people. And I don't quite understand how the messages match that. Is he doing that, and in what way is he doing that? Because I see him as, before I was going to say that I see him as preaching to the converted, but let me just play a clip of Scott Baio, who is the actor from Happy Days, right?
America is an easy place to get to. But for you first-time voters, it's important for you to know what it means to be an American. It doesn't mean getting free stuff. It means sacrificing, winning, losing, failing, succeeding, and sometimes doing the things you don't want to do, including the hard work, in order to get where you want to be. And that's what it means to be an American.
Now, if Trump needs some millennials, isn't this insulting them? Voting for the first time doesn't mean getting free stuff. I assume this is a swipe at the Bernie Sanders crowd.
Right, and I don't necessarily know if that's the message. I mean, he was one of the earliest speakers in the convention. I don't know necessarily if he did the biggest impact. I think that, the saddest thing is one of the best speakers was Melania Trump, when she sat there and said becoming an American citizen is the greatest privilege on planet Earth. I think that speaks very well to new immigrants in this country. I thought that, and I thought that the family has done a very good job. I thought that Dana White did a very good job.
But wait, let me interrupt you. About immigrants, the hope there is that Trump could pick up more Hispanic voters than he's got?
Not just Hispanic, but all immigrants. I mean, most immigrants are not Hispanic. The plurality of immigrants are Asian now. They're not Hispanic anymore. Sure. But it's about new immigrants who sit there and say, I feel the same way. I worked so hard and struggled so much. Donald Trump Jr. had an extremely important point in his speech where he sat there and said, mass immigration, 1.1 million per year, is actually putting new immigrants, Hispanics and poor blacks and working class people at a greater risk of losing their economic interests. They're being competed with by constantly new low skill, low wage workers, and it's hurting them. I mean, that was a really important point that we haven't sold. You know, so many times when we got involved in conversation on immigration, it becomes a negative thing. It becomes connotations about ethnicity. They're putting an economic perspective on it, which is
It's still
extraordinarily
divisive,
important.
though. It's saying
No, I don't think
that
so.
one kind of immigrant is taking jobs from another. No.
Well, I mean, I think this is reasonably well sourced in the economic literature. This is just the nature of it because you're dealing with people of similar skill types, and it's a fruit of Jeff Sessions, the Alabama immigration hawk senator, being a key advisor in the campaign. I think Ryan's right on this point, and another thing too is it's unlike the Democrats, sort of speaking broadly, what you haven't seen Republicans do in the past is sort of focus in on subgroups the way that the Democrats do. And Trump has certainly done something of that with the white working class and the rest. But the nature of Republican politics in general doesn't quite lend itself to that in my view. And so what you're likelier to see is a broader ideological message, sort of like, you know, Ryan offered, you know, security and prosperity for everyone, this kind of thing, or and the idea being that hits people's ears and they'll take that to the polls, or they'll take that to the ballot box without necessarily making a show of it at the polls. And I think that this is sort of an unfalsifiable theory for the Trump campaign, but what I think they think is that people will watch this sort of say, yeah, I kind of agree with that guy, and they'll be quiet about it, but they'll act on it.
It's interesting. Melania Trump spoke a little bit about diversity. You know, she gets a lot of attention about little portion of her speech that was lifted, and I gather that now the speechwriter on this, whether she wrote it or not, offered to resign, and then Trump magnanimously said, no, people make mistakes. What a wonderful boss. You're not fired, you know, is the message there. But it was interesting, I think most people didn't pay that much attention to that sort of softening on diversity part of Melania Trump's speech. So let's look at it.
Donald intends to represent all the people, not just some of the people. That includes Christians and Jews and Muslims. It includes Hispanics and African Americans and Asians and the poor and the middle class. Throughout his career, Donald has successfully worked with people of many faiths and with many nations. Like no one else, I have seen the talent, the energy, the tendency, the resourceful mind, and the simple goodness of the heart that God gave to Donald Trump. Now is the time to use those gifts as never before for purposes far greater than ever. And he will do this better than anyone else can, and it won't even be close.
So that's the, a couple messages there. There's the personal message everyone expected, but there's also that message about diversity. And before we talk about, or did you have a comment?
No, I just love looking at Melania Trump. I'm sorry.
Yes, of course. It's interesting because I thought that even in Rudy Giuliani's speech, which was, you know, fiery and in defense of the police, whatever, there was also a much more diverse, accepting message, a message of accepting people who are gay and straight and black and white, than you would expect, too. Another kind of inclusive speech. So I thought we'd watch a little of that and then talk.
We know the risk you're taking. And we say thank you to every police officer and law enforcement agent who's out tonight protecting us, black, white, Latino, of every race, every color, every creed, every sexual orientation. When they come to save your life, they don't ask if you are black or white. They just come to save you. We also reach out. We reach out our arms with understanding and compassion to those who have lost loved ones because of police shootings, some justified, some unjustified. Those that are unjustified must be punished. Those that are justified, we must apologize to.
Apologize to whom? I didn't quite get it.
I would assume that, so oftentimes the media will pick up on these police shootings and make up scenarios and myths like hands up, don't shoot, and vilify officers who and destroy their lives. They'll never have their lives back. One Google search will ruin them forever. And maybe it's those police officers that we should be apologizing to.
You think that's what it means? I guess so. It's interesting how he weaved in the diversity and the openness, because that certainly has not been the message and not the support. I mean, there's only, I think, 19 black delegates among all those thousands, and the white support is enormous, the black-white divide. I don't think Trump has a percentage of black support.
I think this is one of the areas in which you see just a stark contrast between the overwhelming personality of Donald Trump and the broadly the rest of the Republican Party. I mean, again, go back to the contrast between Trump and Ryan. Trump is racist, or at least whether he's racist or not, I should say. There's certainly the question of race in a lot of what he's saying that's very, very problematic, with the judge and the rest. Whereas Ryan, for years, has been talking about a party that of a rising tide for everyone, prosperity that doesn't abide by class or racial distinctions. I mean, this is a man who spent the last 4 years doing making regular trips into the inner cities across the country to find out how to deal with poverty, especially in minority communities. I think that is an agenda that has a lot more buy-in among Republican leaders, and that you would see enacted if you had a Rubio at the top of the ticket.
I wonder about
or something.
that. I mean, I've read some of these quite carefully, his suggestions, and I'm sure you have too, and they all cost money. Well, sure. And I've seen him attacked on the right, by the right, for, that doesn't cut much money, and that's not different enough.
Right. Well, the biggest problem with Paul Ryan's plans of how to stop poverty is that they all include an immigration policy that includes importing more poor people. You cannot possibly close the gap between the rich and the poor if you are importing more than 1 million poor people per year. You just can't. And I think that's where the Donald Trump factor comes in. I think Donald Trump's much more populist about fighting poverty. He doesn't care about sitting there. He's not one of these conservative ideologues who sits there and says we need to sit there and just shrink government into a bathtub. He wants to solve problems, and that's a huge problem. Between automation and the changing way we do jobs and the changing economy for the future, a lot of working class people are going to be completely unemployed.
Well, it's interesting you raise that. I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's interesting you raise that because Trump, promises by not allowing a corporation to move to Mexico or wherever, whether it's air conditioners or Oreo cookies, that somehow or another these jobs will stay here or come back, when in fact, as you were just saying, it's actually a huge change in the world economy.
Right, but we also
he's offering a fix that's not relevant.
We also put our workers in direct competition with the cheapest labor on earth. We are absolutely giving out to the corporations over the workers. Bernie Sanders would say that, most Democrats would say that, Donald Trump is saying that. That's an issue that most people would resonate with, and most people feel it in their hearts.
Right. Let me ask a broader question about the future of the party. I was listening to Rush Limbaugh today, and he asked an interesting question, which was, is Trump the man, or is he a movement that happened to ride a movement to success? Is the popularity personal, or is it representative of a tectonic shift in politics? Want to take a stab at that, either of you?
Go ahead. No,
it's an enormously difficult question.
Not that they're totally separable,
right,
I understand.
And that's a crucial point to be made. There's the simple fact of Donald Trump's celebrity, which no one else has been able to replicate, which it would be hard to think of anyone being able to replicate. There's the fact of timing. I have to think that a lot of this is serendipitous, and it's tied to the fact that this was a man with just an enormous saturation, enormous name recognition at a moment of profound dissatisfaction. I'm inclined to think that if Donald Trump doesn't win in November, which I would put the smart money on at this point, what you would see is a rearrangement, sort of reformation of the Republican apparatus and sort of the Republican policy vision to try and incorporate some of the better aspects of that, while also in a way that will bring some of those dissatisfied people back in.
Sure,
and you'll
sure.
find out at that point this isn't something that's sort of a world historical moment as much as it's tied to the man.
Yeah, but Trump will have taught the party a lesson.
Right. I believe it's a movement. I believe in my heart it's a movement. I think that, we saw in the primaries with 17 candidates, 15 were selling George W. Bush 2.0, one was Rand Paul, and the other one was Donald Trump. That was the party. And that message, that neoconservative 2004 message, doesn't sell anymore. It's not selling with the American people, and there's a new chapter in the Republican Party, and I think that Donald Trump Jr.'s speech actually showed that the future was going to be. It is populism. It is a nationalist movement, and I think that with or without Trump, it's going to continue because the path of foreign adventurism, open borders, massive free trade, corporatism, it really doesn't sell. It doesn't sell with the average Republican voter, and I think that there's going to be opportunities for a cleaned-up version of Donald Trump without maybe the showmanship, without the more offensive comments that can lead into the future for sure.
And is your smart money on Trump or
I
on
would say
Hillary?
Trump has a probably 40% chance, and it's itching up there.
Right, that's like double what some people say. But
Now Nate Silver says it's close to 40%.
is he up to close to 40 now?
Yeah.
Oh, see, you're updating me.
Yeah.
So the question is then, has the convention changed those numbers? Will it? Do you think there's a bounce coming?
It has changed it, certainly. He has been going up at the same exact time with Comey, and I think that you have to wait and see what Ivanka and Donald do, the tag team, on the last night, and I think that will, if he reintroduces himself to the American public as the brand new Donald and people buy it, and if the DNC goes badly, if Bernie protesters sit there and start fires, and there's more cop killings and the narrative follows him, we're going to have a good November.
Thanks for coming, both of you. That's POTUS 2016 for this week. Next time, parsing the rhetoric from the Democrats' podium in Philadelphia. Sitting in for Brian Lehrer, I'm Marty Goldenson. Thanks for watching.